biggest mistakes that I see that results in people gaining more body fat than muscle, aka wasting time and further driving the belief that drugs are the missing piece, starting with too little runway. So being in a position where hey, you're at a body fat that's already uncomfortable. You're only going to allow yourself realistically to gain like 5 pounds before truly you're miserable, like you hate how you look. You need to have at least 12 weeks minimum of time to gain. And I wouldn't say that like aiming for 0.5 pound per week, like 0.5 pound, that would be nice in theory. But realistically, there are going to be some weeks where you're a little bit over. There's going to be some weeks where you're under. But having enough runway to where you can gain weight and you can even gain some body fat. So starting in a position where you're lean enough to support some body fat gain that mentally you're going to reconcile. Okay, that has to happen. Number 2, other big mistake, not tracking as precisely as you would in a contest prep. And in turn, not controlling body fat gain. So like I said before, going about how do we ruin our building phase and burn through a runway, tracking very inconsistently. Seeing the intentional growth phase as like a free-for-all, just gaining a bunch of weight, every day making mistakes within like how you're reporting food and just being like, fuck it, whatever. I'll just be a little fatter and I'll tell myself I have to get over it next week. You do that enough. I mean, like it only takes 500 calories over your maintenance to gain a pound of body fat. And I'm telling you, if you're going up a pound in a week's time, it's not muscle. Like a large majority, like we're talking like 1/4 pound of that at least is body fat. Number 3, jumping into PEDs before progress stalls. Just jumping into him, just saying, okay, I did the growth thing. I'm in the growth phase. I made the commitment. I marked it on my calendar. I'm growing till here. And then rather than actually trying to maximize what you're doing naturally, rather than trying to get trying to get as much as you can out of this phase, you put yourself in a position where you're like, no, I mean, like this sucks. It's shitty. Remember, I want the drugs. Like I want the drugs to make this less shitty. That's not what you should do. You should wait. You should wait until you stall. You should wait until you're kind of at that midway point where you're like, okay, I built some muscle. I did build some muscle, but now maybe I am at the point where like body fat is a little high. Maybe it does make sense, but this is predicated on you were seeing growth based on your current program and you're going to continue that current program. That is when I would consider the PEDs. Number 4, not taking the measurements accurately, not doing the skin fold sites. So kind of just, again, what I said previously, randomly taking these things and not really paying attention to changes. You're like, okay, I don't know if this is the same part of my leg in which I'm measuring the circumference. Maybe you go to a different trainer, do the skin fold sites. You need continuity, you need consistency in how these things are measured. And I know it can sound daunting what I'm saying, like, yo, wait, like, how do I get someone else? Okay, I do both of these things myself. And like, yeah, my boyfriend, like I do his, he's plenty competent to do his own. I'm accurate with his, but for most people, I would say, just take them yourself. It is very easy. You don't need to rely on your husband, your wife to get these things. You can certainly do it yourself. In taking measurements accurately on a consistent interval, this is going to give you insight, is going to allow those decisions to intake, whether you pull down or you push up with food. It's going to allow you to make these out of logic, not out of emotion, not out of haste, which is ultimately what we want to avoid. And last but not least, the biggest mistake that I see for individuals who ultimately it then results in them gaining more body fat than they'd like when they were trying to put on muscle is that when they find they're gaining too quickly, they go back into a deficit. They are like, okay, no more surplus, dropping food. Like, you know, in some people's cases, you're at like a 2,300 calories. And instead of just pulling food down to 2,000 or 1,900, they pull their food way the fuck down to 1,300, 1,400. And they're like, okay, a week of dieting back here. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wash off all the body fat. And they do this, and this builds in that habit, that routine of like, as soon as weight hits this threshold, as soon as it hits 140, 145, I'm just going to go back into a deficit. I get the sentiment in theory. Like I'm sure I can understand it, and I've wanted to do that myself. I've done that myself. But I can tell you, in the case of someone looking to really build muscle, you need to commit to that frame of time spent in a building phase. And the more time that you can spend in that phase, refining the skills around training, refining the habits that maybe are not as much in the forefront while you're in a fat loss phase, regarding recovery, regarding just sleep hygiene, and just generally like auto-regulating your volume enough so that you can sustain that program and you're not consistently burnt out. The more time you can spend in that state of building habits, building skill, the greater those skills develop too. And ultimately, those are the skills that they're the same skills. I mean, the skills that you need to build muscle, you need a much lower degree of them in order to retain muscle. But having those skills and implementing those skills, those habits will ultimately allow your next fat loss phase to be easier, which is why I strongly encourage you to spend that time in that intentional growth phase, fostering the skills that are going to be needed to allow you to retain muscle next time you're in prep or fat loss phase.